Have you ever wanted to make your own plant support poles? In this video I'll take you through step by step how I've made these 3 poles, the materials I've used, how much it's cost to make them, as well as some cost saving alternatives. I'll be showing you how to make a coconut core support pole similar to the ones that you get in the shops, although this one is perhaps a little bit more environmentally friendly, a hessian support pole using hessian fabric, and one using jute rope. So these are actually all surprisingly easy to make. I've actually made these during the filming of the video, so they don't take very long at all. I'm filming this bit at the end and then editing it in just so that I can show you the results of what you can achieve if you follow on step by step on what we're about to do. The benefits of making your own support poles are they can often be cheaper than what you can buy in store, as we'll run through a little bit later. You can make them to the exact size that you require for the particular plant that you're trying to support, whether that's smaller or larger than the ones that you can find in shops. And it's also quite relaxing to make these. So this channel is called Grow Your Wellbeing, so while it is mostly about plants, these sorts of activities, crafty type activities, can be really mindful and really relaxing when you are just focusing on creating what you're trying to create. And then the results as well, you've got the satisfaction of knowing that you've made it yourself. So the first type of support pole that I'll show you to make is using rope. This is a really easy method, it's really quick to make, and there's a couple of different ways that you can do it. You can decide on what's best for you, or depending on what materials that you've got. It's really cost effective as well, so this was only a couple of pounds from a local craft shop. You can also buy it in larger quantities in craft shops or online as well, so I'll link some things below if I can, if I've got any sort of recommended products for the best prices that I can find them at. This dowling that I've got as well, which you'll need, or some sort of support pole, this was actually more expensive than I was expecting. It's from a local hardware store. These you can buy in most hardware stores. I will put at the end some alternatives that you can use as well, which are a little bit cheaper, so depending on your budget, I'll share those at the end, so stay tuned for those. So there are a couple of different ways that you can do this. I'll show you both and you can decide on what's best for you. I've just tied the end of the rope to the pole. I've left a bit of a gap here for the pole to go in the soil. So where we've tied it, all I'm going to do is just tuck the loose end underneath and then start to wrap the rope around the pole. And what I'm trying to do is just make sure it's as tight as it can be. It might take a couple of turns around the pole to help build up the tension, and as you go you can just ensure that these bits stay bunched up. You might need to move them occasionally just to fill any gaps that might appear as you're sort of twisting around the pole. If the rope does start to move or does start to slip a little bit, one thing that can help is if you twist the rope as you go. The twisting will help to create friction or tension between where it's touching the other pieces of the rope and help to hold it together. A bit like the same principle if you've got any cord, you'll see that that's how they've actually created it. They've actually twisted it together, which helps it hold itself together. So it's the same principle as that. The first method, you don't need any adhesive, you just need to sort of tie it tightly enough so that it stays in place, but you can also use adhesive to help you. So with this, all I would do is just a small amount of glue along the pole and then attach the rope onto that, and then that way at least we know it's going to stay in place once that dries. So as you go along the pole, whether you do it just for the ends to secure the ends, or you might decide to put a little bit of glue at intervals along the pole just to make sure that it does stay put. So at the start I was wrapping the rope around the end of the pole to create my loops around the pole. However, I have found it's much easier to hold the rope still and just turn the pole as if you're rolling the rope up. This is much easier and much quicker. So as you get to the end of the pole, all you need to do is just tie it off at the end or stick it down at the end. If you're not using an adhesive, then you will obviously need to tie it off. But if you are using an adhesive, you could also cover the top if you wish to, by just putting some adhesive on there and then sticking the end of the rope down on there to cover the pole completely. However, there's no issue with just sort of finishing at the top, just there if you need to. So here we have it, the finished rope support pole. As I was using an adhesive, I was able to cover the top of the wood and stick the end down. This is about 80 centimeters long, so cost wise, if I were buying this in store, I'd expect to maybe pay about £5.99 for an 80 centimeter pole. A little bit smaller, maybe £3.99. This size sort of up to £5.99. This cost to make with the doweling that I've used, which was £8 for 2.4 meters length. So as this is a third of that, about £2.66 for that, and the rope was £2. So £4.66 roughly for this. So maybe a little bit cheaper than what it would cost to buy as a coconut coir support pole in the store of a similar length. So the next one that we're going to make is the coconut coir one, so very similar to the ones that you'll buy in the shops. So I've got a roll of coconut coir lining, which I found in the garden centre near the hanging basket section, or you can also find it in the sort of garden liner type section. You can also buy it online, which I'll link some below, which is very similar to this that I've got. This was £7.99 for the roll, and again I've got a piece of doweling that came off the piece that I bought earlier. So I just bought a larger piece of doweling, as you can see there, the label, 2.4 meters, and cut it down into 3 80 centimeter lengths. All I'm going to do is wrap this around the pole and tie it down to secure it. So I've got some natural yarn, I think this is jute or hessian yarn, to tie it down. Now with the amount of lining that I've got, this could make a lot of support poles, as all I'm going to be doing is wrapping a smaller amount around the pole, and the poles are quite slim, so it won't actually take that much to create the support poles. Or I could make them longer, but again this would still make quite a few poles. So this is where it might be more cost effective to make your own than actually buying them in the shops ready-made. So I've cut my piece of coir lining to length. It's almost the length of the pole that I've got. I've just left the end piece blank or bare, just like I did before. So this will be the bit that goes in the soil. I've got enough of the lining here to wrap around the pole twice, and then I'll secure it in place using the jute twine that I've cut to length here. So I'll use a few pieces initially just to hold it in place, and then I'll go over it again with more of this to really secure it down. Now this was surprisingly fiddly, trying to get this to wrap around the pole, because it's actually quite rigid. So I've used a few more extra ties just to fasten it in place, and then now I'll go over it with additional jute just to fasten it all the way down in a more uniform way. So just to show you what I've done so far, as I said, I was going to put the yarn along the length of the coir to attach it to the pole, and do so in a way to make it look a bit neater. So I've done this so far for this section here. With this, there's a couple of ways that you can do this. I think the easiest way is if you secure it at the top, and you can actually just go around it with a piece of string, a bit like we did with the rope, and just fasten it that way. Just make sure you put it really tightly. The coarseness of the coir will help to stick it to the yarn as well, which I've found as I've been doing this, to hold it in place in this sort of pattern. So you can just twist it around, and that is a lot quicker to do, and then tie it off at the end. For this one, I do think it is a little bit more secure the way that I've done it. It does take a little bit longer, but I'll just show you what I've been doing. So I've been taking the yarn, which I've got here, take quite a long piece, fold it in half, so you've got the loop, and then we're going to put it around the pole with a lark's head knot. So against the pole with the loop, and then all you do is tuck the rest of the string through the loop, and that will give you a good starting point to secure it to the pole. So now we can pull that tight, and because it's through the other end of the string, you can see that is nice and tight on there. And then to make sure that that is secured, I've then taken one of the strings in the direction around the pole that it was going in, so as it went through the loop, and then one back on itself, so it pulls back on the loop and keeps it tight. Then all I'm going to do is just do a standard double knot just to hold that in place so it doesn't become loose again. And going on from there, as you can see, I've done that at the start as well and come down to here before I ran out of string, so I had to start again. So I've now attached that there, and that's very secure, and you can see how tight it is on the core, holding it in place. I've just, to get quite a consistent pattern, I've just been looping it round in a bit like a V shape, as you can see there, against the core, and then overlapping one thread over the other, again so they pull on each other so they don't end up sort of bunching up here, and hold each other in place. Loop it round to the back, and then we'll do another double knot. And then I'm just going to go down it in the same way and just repeat this, and I'll keep doing this until I get to the end of the pole, and then we'll have this sort of nice sort of crisscross, almost diamond pattern of the thread down the pole. So now that I've got to the end, I'm just going to do a couple of extra knots just to fasten that down on both sides of the pole, and I can get rid of the other knots that I had as preliminary knots previously. And there we have it, coconut core support pole. As you can see, it's fairly uniform. It's still got a little bit of a rustic look to it just because of the natural materials, but it looks fairly uniform down the pole, and that's now nice and secure on the dowling. What I might do is just tidy up this end bit now that we've got to the end and just trim off where it's uneven, but that won't even be noticeable. If you think about where it'll be in the pot, that might even be submerged a little bit or covered by the lower foliage of your plant, so I wouldn't worry too much about that if there are any sort of slight rough edges. So looking at how much this has cost me to make, the dowling, as I said before, was about £2.66 for this piece that I've got here, and the core was £7.99 for a reasonably sized roll. Once I'd cut this piece off, this 80cm piece off, it looks like I've got enough for potentially another 3 more, so 4 out of that roll, which would be £2 of core that I've used here, but there's definitely excess as well, so I could easily make another 1 or 2 smaller poles as well. So on the basis that this is conservative basis, that's £2 of core and £2.66 for the pole, this has cost me £4.66 to make. As before, I would expect to pay between £3.99 and £5.99 for this, so it's still sort of within that range of what I might pay for it in the shop, depending on where I get it from. One thing I would say about the core is it can be quite rough, so if you do have sensitive skin or sensitive hands, then do wear gloves just to protect them. You might find that particularly when you're trying to sort of wrap it round and hold it in place for the preliminary knots. So the next one that we'll make is the one with the hessian or the jute fabric. The same thing, I'll just use that term interchangeably. Hessian is made from jute. So this should be a little bit easier. As you can see, this is a little bit more flexible than the core, and it's a lot softer too. So this should just be a case of wrapping it around the pole, securing it in place, probably much in the same way that we did with the core, with some knots, or you might be able to start it off with adhesive, or even finish it with adhesive if you've got something like a hot glue gun as we used earlier, or other sort of suitable adhesive for this type of activity or task. So I've got my dowling, I've got my hessian, so now I'm going to cut it down to size for what I need, and we'll start tying it in place with some of the jute yarn. So I've cut the hessian fabric down to size, so this is enough to cover the pole lengthwise with a little bit left over for the pole to go in the soil. And I've also then done it about 50 centimetres or thereabouts wide, and this should give us a good cover of the hessian. Now what I've noticed is, as I've tried to roll it, I mean, it could be quite easy just to roll it and then overlap and then keep rolling, and then we'll tie it in place anyway. But what might be easiest in this sort of instance is if you have got an adhesive, to start it with a bit of adhesive so that it doesn't keep sort of pulling away from the pole, as this is quite a smooth pole if you're using dowling. So use a little bit of adhesive to stick it down initially, and then it'll be much easier to roll it along. So that's what I'll do to start with the glue gun. I'm going to put a tiny bit of glue along the pole, so it looks like that's stuck down now, so enough to get us started with the rolling, and that's much better in terms of holding it in place so that it stays tight against the pole as we roll. So now that's in place, I'm just going to tidy this edge up that's sticking out, and then I will start to tie it down. So just as I did with the coconut coir one, I'm going to use some of the string to put some preliminary knots on there to hold it in place, maybe at the end or both ends and in the middle, and make sure that they're secured tightly. And then what I will do is go down it in a more uniform fashion to make it look a little bit nicer and secure it all the way down. Okay, so that's the preliminary holding knots in place down the length of the pole. So now I'm going to do just as I did before with the coir pole, use a lark's head knot to start it off. So I'll start at the top and work down the pole. So I'll put the lark's head knot on with a folded over bit of string, put the loose ends through the loop, and then pull one in the direction it was already going in around the pole, one in the opposite direction to pull the loop tight, and then I'm just going to do a double knot around the other side, which will hold that in place firmly. So for this one I've decided to try the faster method of just wrapping the string around rather than sort of tying knots or doing any sort of pattern with the knots as I go down the pole. So all I'm doing with this is keeping both threads together and then just wrapping it around a couple of centimetres apart each time and pulling tight as I go, just to make sure that it's holding the fabric in place against the pole. And that's this one done. So as before, I can just get rid of the holding knots that were in place just to tidy it up. And here is our hessian support pole. If you do find that the fabric comes down the pole at all, you can just gently prompt it up, back up so that it comes to the top of the pole. You might find, as you've just noticed there, sometimes there are some rough edges with the hessian fabric and the threads can come loose. So that's one slight downside, but they're easily trimmed down afterwards. And if it is on the edges, your main raw edge is going to be tied down anyway here, so that shouldn't be a problem. We've used the edge of the fabric here, which is already secured so that the fabric doesn't come loose. You could, if you're using the edge, a cut edge of the fabric on the top end, you could try folding it over first so that you don't have loose threads coming off at the end. And I'm not too worried about having the raw edge of the fabric here because this is going to go in the soil, so this might even be covered by a little bit of the soil, or at least by the lower foliage of the plant. So in terms of cost and how much that pole cost to make, the fabric was quite a large piece that I bought on Amazon for about £10, give or take a couple of pounds. I'll link it below if I can, if you're after the same thing. I do always try and find the most cost effective materials for the amount that you're getting for the price that you're paying. So this was about £10, give or take a couple of pounds, and the amount that I've used was about a sixth to an eighth of the material that I've got here, so I could easily make that pole 6 to 8 times from how much I've got here. So thinking if it was £10, maybe about £1.80-ish, £1.80, £1.85 worth of material used for that pole, plus the £2.60 for the actual pole itself, or £2.66 for the pole itself. So that is about £4.40, I think. £4.40, £4.50. My mental arithmetic is clearly not that very good, but about £4.40, £4.50 to make that. I'll probably drop something on the video at the end just to say, as a correction, to say what the actual cost would have been. So as I mentioned before, there are some alternatives that you can use to make these even cheaper. So with these ones that I've made for demo purposes, I've used a piece of doweling. This was £8 for a 2.4 metre piece. It works out about £2.67 per piece because I cut it down into 3 80cm lengths for these poles. It is a finished piece of wood, so that's potentially why it is more expensive. However, when I was in the hardware store, I also looked for an alternative that might be cheaper and came across this, which is just a thin piece of oblong wood. Not too dissimilar to the doweling that I've got here, and this was significantly less. This was £2 for a 2.1 metre length of wood. So £2 as opposed to £8, although it is 30 centimetres smaller overall, that's a massive difference. That's a 75% difference, albeit just being that little bit smaller. So to cut this down into 3 70cm lengths, as opposed to cutting this down into 3 80cm lengths, it would cost approximately 67p per pole, as opposed to the £2.67 that this costs. The only difference is the shape of it. So obviously when we think of moss pole, we think round pole, but what difference does it make if it's oblong as opposed to round? Once this is wrapped in hessian or with rope or coir, it's not really going to be that noticeable. This will still stick in the soil, and once the plant's around it as well, or supported up it, it's really not going to be that noticeable. It's still going to do the same job for such a significant saving. So if you were to use this instead, that would take the cost of making one of these yourself, either this one or the coconut coir one, or even the rope one. I think they all came in at about £4.50, around that mark off the top of my head. I'll see what I said earlier in the video, but about £4.50. This would take that down to about £2.50 per pole that you're making. So that is a significant saving, and as we said, the shop price is £3.99 to £5.99. I hope you found this video useful in showing you how to make your own plant support poles. If you have, please consider hitting the subscribe button. We'll have new videos every week, and we've actually got another video on how to make a moss support pole using sphagnum moss. Check that out, and then you can decide on which pole you want to make for your plants, be it these or an actual moss pole. If you've got any questions, please do put them in the comments below and we'll respond to everyone. And as always, thank you for watching Grow Your Wellbeing.